Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Catalyst webinar series presented by the Education Committee for the Southern California PGA. The Catalyst webinar series is a bi-weekly educational platform for creating success and change in your club and career. We're very excited to have the support again from Ken Mengel. He is the owner and operator of KM Performance Management. KM Golf Performance and Mengel Method is a physical therapy operation. Ken is a graduate of the University of Whittier College, and he got his master's degree from USC in physical therapy. He specializes in physical therapy pertaining to golf, not just sports medicine for golf, but also all athletes. He's based out of Arcadia, and he has been a very strong supporter of the Southern California PGA. He is a Metro Chapter member, and he's joining us again. I think, Ken, this is your second or your third time presenting on the Catalyst.
This is the third, yeah.
Third time, correct. And we had met at the annual meeting a couple of years ago, and since then, Ken has been kind enough to come on the webcast several times, and we're delighted that he's joining us this morning. Good morning, Ken.
Good morning, John. It's my pleasure, and thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to share and to grow our relationship. So it's my honor.
Excellent. Well, as we've done here in the past, Ken has a slide deck PowerPoint presentation, and he'll be taking us through his principles and philosophies and practices. And we encourage all the PGA members on this morning's webcast to raise your hand, come off a mute, chime in, use the chat box if you're a little shy about talking. We want to make the Catalyst webinar as interactive as possible. Ken can field any questions that you have pertaining to his business, and we look forward to the hour. Thanks, everybody.
Excellent. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining. Whether you're live with us now, fantastic. I appreciate that. If you're going to log on later, good to have you on later on as well. The last Catalyst webinar I presented on was periodization for the golf athlete. We kind of focused on the junior golf athlete, really through the competitive, collegiate, and young professional. There were some requests after that on, hey, what about the rest of us? And you'll see on the first slide here, I fall into this category as well, is what about training the senior golf athlete? So today's presentation is just on that. What do we do in training the senior golf athlete? What are the critical pieces that we need to know? Kind of some of even the basics of the biology behind it and such. So who is the senior golf athlete, or who is the senior athlete? The senior athlete is at least a whopping 50 years old, as defined in sport, currently participating in or seeking to participate in an athletic endeavor. So for all of us that are the ripe old age of 50 or above, we are considered a senior athlete. And this is something important to remember. We may not feel it, and some days we may really feel it, but changes start happening, and we'll see these pieces. So what do we need to know when we're working with a senior golfer, when we're working with a senior athlete? Well, the same things that we need to know when working with anybody, but it's a little more critical just because we've got a little more time in history behind us. So we need to know a basic medical history. And I think this goes for not only if they're training, if they're in physical therapy, or if it's on the range and it's teaching. We need to know a basic medical history. We need to know if we're dealing with anything that we need to be very concerned with. A basic injury history. Have they had shoulder injury? Have they had a rotator cuff repair? Have they had a surgical history where they've got a total knee on one side and a total hip on the other? These all set form of expectation more than anything else. Very often, they don't have to be limits in what we can do, but it's going to alter our expectation in maybe how fast we can get to our end point. Precautions, contraindications associated with the history. And this is just a simple question of, has your doctor told you anything that you shouldn't be doing as a result of the medical history, the total knee, the total hip, the heart condition, whatever it is that you might be dealing with. And we want to abide by those precautions and contraindications. A really important one as we start to get up in age, and particularly when we're talking about 60, 70 and older, is the fall history. And a fall history is important because, one, significant injury can happen from a fall. Two, significant liability is associated with the fall. So whether it's in the gym, in the clinic, on the range, or on the course, we don't want to have that liability, or we want to manage that liability. And the best predictor of a fall is the history of a fall. So if this person suffered a fall in the past, the likelihood of them suffering a fall in the future is much, much greater. So I think that's important on a lot of fronts. What is their history in sports and exercise? Are they new to the sport? Are they new to sports in general? Are they new to athletics? Have they grown up in a gym? Do they exercise regularly? We want to kind of know that background because, again, that sets a precedent for us to look at and say, this person is likely going to be a little more of a challenge to work with because they are new to the sport, they don't exercise regularly, or this person's probably got a little bit more of a background. And then with our ladies, we want to be respectful in knowing where are they at, because this is important. Especially if they brought up a history of osteoporosis, osteopenia, things of that nature, we want to manage those cases with caution, but also knowing that they need to be loaded, they need the exercise. That's going to be the best thing for them. So with our females that are postmenopausal, are they on hormone replacement? If they are, that's a good management tool for the bone health. If they are not and they're osteoporotic, we want to also be aware of the fact that if they have a fall history associated with that, we really need to manage them a little more cautiously. So the average age of golfers in the United States, for females, the average age, 43 years old. For males, the age is 53 years old. We look at this in context and we say, okay, this is going to change over the years because right now, 16% of the population is 65 years of age or older in the United States. It's supposed to rise to 20.
Ken, just to interject real quick.
Yeah.
Is that average age for females so much lower because the population pool of female golfers is so much less than males?
Definitely the pool is a smaller pool to draw from. And I think that this is a number from 2022. And I think it takes into account the new influx of the young ladies and the professional females that have started golfing. Particularly, that was the largest rise in the COVID year, the 2020 year, was in the female golf athlete joining the ranks. So this actually takes that into account. But yeah, it is a smaller pool in which to draw from. But as we see these ages, 43 and 53, they're likely to rise on the average over the next 10, 15, 25 years, because instead of 16% of the population being 65 years of age, we're looking at 24% being over the age of 65 in the next 25 years. So this senior athlete, the senior golfer, is going to be much more common than we already are over the next 20, 25 years. Life expectancy currently in the US is over 77 years of age. So when you're looking over 65, you've got 12, 13, 15 years over the next 20, 25 years that we're going to have people still out golfing on a regular basis. So here's where we kind of get to the difference of thought process in how we train and how we look at lifestyle in our senior golfers. So biology versus behavior. Biology being things that we don't have a direct control over. We have some control over, but not as direct a control over as our behaviors. So changes in strength and fitness through the lifespan are kind of as such. 20 to 40 years of age, most changes that we see in our fitness and strength levels are behavioral, related to less activity or more activity. Most of it is related to less activity. We're in our work years, we're sitting in a car and commuting, we're sitting at a desk on a computer, and we are not doing the same levels of activity on the physical side of things that we were doing when we were in college and before. So most changes here are very much within our control. These are things that we need to activate and make sure that we're setting a table so that as we get older, those pieces that are in our control have some effect on some of those things that are less in our control. So when we get to 40 to 60 years of age, now we're starting to see more of the changes becoming biologic changes. They're kind of inevitabilities, so to speak, versus just behavioral. However, our behavior from 20 to 40 had influence on what we see at 40 to 60. And we still have control on the behavioral side of things. We can still dial back the clock, so to speak, or slow the clock down on these biologic changes with the right levels of activity and strength training. Now we get 60 years and over, this is where we see a more significant increase in the inevitable biologic changes. Again, not to say that you throw your hands up in the air and say, well, I'm over 60 and there's nothing I can do about it, because we can still make changes. We can, and sometimes positive change in people's capabilities is simply slowing regression, because regression is a natural process. But if we can slow or halt that for a period of time, that's progress. So kind of an interesting fact is in our 80s, we are at half of the physical performance capacity as we were in our 20s. It's a pretty significant number to kind of look at. We're at half the ability to do in our 20s what we are in our 80s. And that's something to take into account, because I'm sure that at some point in time, we all have people that are cresting that 80-year time frame that are still out on the golf course and still working with us on the range and in the gym. And we need to be aware of that capability. So biology, behavior, here's some of the basic science behind strength and aging is the term of hypertrophy. Hypertrophy is basically, you can think of it as building. It's building muscle bulk. It's a condition where the synthesis of the muscle or the generation of the muscle exceeds the breakdown. Let's not forget that every day, just with daily stress, daily activities, daily inactivity, we are going through breakdown of tissue. The body is always regenerating and replenishing. Hypertrophy is where our replenishment is happening at a level that's greater than the breakdown. We stimulate that with resistance training. We stimulate that with regular doses of resistance training, because we have to tell the brain that, hey, this guy, this gal keeps doing these things that's breaking this muscle tissue apart. If he keeps breaking this muscle tissue apart, why don't we rebuild it at a stronger level to where it's harder to break apart? And that's where you start to see your strength gains, is now you've got to bump your game up to break it down so that the brain keeps that stimulus of, let me rebuild it stronger. Kind of like the old $6 Million Man slogan was, better, stronger, faster. We can rebuild them. Same type of thing here. We want to give the brain that stimulus that says, we need to rebuild this person better, stronger, faster, because they keep doing this to themselves in this way. Results of hypertrophy are increased strength. So muscle strength, as we'll see in a little bit, is directly related to cross-sectional area or the thickness of the muscle. You have a tri-tip roast is going to be able to produce a whole lot more force on a muscle than a flank steak will. And that's really what we're looking at. Some of our muscles are naturally built as the flank steak. Some of our muscles are naturally built as the tri-tip. And what are we looking for in terms of building strength and power is we want those large muscles to be as large and powerful as possible. So through aging process, we go through a process called sarcopenia. Sarcopenia on the basic level is age-related involuntary loss of skeletal muscle mass beginning approximately the 4th decade of life. So we said the senior golf athlete is over the age of 50. The 4th decade of life technically is our 30s. So we look at the 4th decade of life and we say we're starting to lose muscle mass involuntarily. No matter what we do, it's harder to maintain those gains. This is something to be aware of. So we say 50 as a senior golf athlete, but we've got a 20-year head start on seeing age-related muscle loss. This is where, when we look at ourselves sometimes, when we look at people walking down the street, when we look at people on the driving range, they've got this condition that I like to call NBS. It's the no butt syndrome. And when we used to put our wallet in our pants and our pants were tied against our rump and our wallet slid in between our rump and our pants pocket, there was no movement of that wallet. We see people that are walking on the golf course, and if they had a wallet in their back pocket, there'd be airspace between their wallet and their rump. That glute has shrunk. Whether it's a disuse component, whether it's sarcopenia, whether it's both, we want to be aware of the fact that, again, we want to do everything we can to hypertrophy so that we minimize this sarcopenia, this age-related loss. And this relates then to what they call dynapenia, which is the loss of strength, not caused by neurologic or muscular diseases, but it's related to sarcopenia. As I lose mass, I lose force production capability. Again, if my tri-tip is smaller in its thickness, it can't produce as much force as it did when it was at its thickest. So why train for speed? Well, speed is the number one thing that we hear complaints of on the gym side. Distance is directly related to that speed. I'm sure that's the number one thing that people are complaining of as we get older is, I'm not as long as I used to be, I'd like to gain some length. So speed is also the first athletic characteristic that we lose as we age. So interesting pairing there is, physiologically, there's a reason for why we're seeing the loss of speed and the loss of distance. So we picture a baseball player up in age, used to be a 300 hitter, used to be able to put the bat on the fastball, and they just can't quite catch up with it anymore. The boxer that's in the ring that used to see the jab and slide to the left and avoid it, and now they're taking it in the chin. That's that little bit of speed and quickness that starts to show. So speed is reliant on strength because it's a product of the rate and amount of force production. So acceleration is a component in there. How fast, how rapidly can we get up to a velocity? And that's reliant on force. Strength, as we said, is related to the muscle's cross-sectional area. So the more muscle mass we have, the more force we can produce. And then we have acceleration, which there's an inherent part of acceleration, which some of us have at a greater level than others. There's a training part of it, which is really a teaching part to a large degree, because a lot of it is nervous system based. If we don't move fast regularly, the chance of us moving fast when we want to is pretty slim. So there's a learned component to speed and acceleration, which is something that needs to be taught and refreshed regularly. So speed is all about type. So we look at muscle fibers, and I'm sure most of us have heard of type 1 fibers, type 2 fibers, or slow twitch and fast twitch fibers. And muscles are not all one or the other. You don't have a muscle that is all slow twitch fibers and a muscle that is all fast twitch fibers. Muscles are percentages of both fiber types. Individuals have a propensity or a predisposition towards a fiber type dominance. So sprinters have a type 2 fast twitch fiber type dominant. You've got those people that have been fast from the time they were kids, they're fast through high school, they're fast as adults. They are a type 2 fiber type predominance. Type 1, the slow twitch fibers, those are the first fibers that the nervous system engages, and they're the last fibers that turn off through a muscle contraction. They are built for endurance. They're the muscles that support our posture. There are a lot of the small muscles, the fine tuners that hold us into place. We wouldn't want fast twitch fibers for our posture fiber dominance because we'd fatigue within a very short period of time, and we would lose all kinds of postural function as a result of that. However, we don't want to try and jump or explode or swing a golf club and hit a driver with our type 1 fibers being the dominant fibers, because they don't ramp up quickly. Our type 2 fibers are fast twitch. They can be first on with training. So typically, first muscles on are the type 1 fibers. The first off are the type 2 fibers. But with training, we can get the type 1 fibers to be the dominant factor. Is that noise a problem? Okay, good. Good. There's some work being done at the building next door. Sorry about that. So type 2 fibers, built for strength and speed and power. The way to get these type 2 fibers to kick on quickly is to train them. And we need to train them in a way that is, again, train fast to be fast, train slow to be slow. If we don't move fast, we're not going to train fast. So can we control our fiber type? There's debate still on this. There's still a lot of good research going on, but the percentage of type 1 fibers, or slow twitch fibers, in our muscles grows with age. So do we lose type 2 fibers or do we gain type 1 fibers as part of the debate? And part of the debate is how much of this is purely aging and how much of this is use. If we don't do things that require our type 2 fibers to engage, if we don't do things that are speed and power related, then do we lose them simply because of that, or is it simply the aging process? My feeling is until we know for certain, and even when we do know quote unquote for certain, we've got to use what we want to use. And I think that's where these the strength and the power training comes in. So the question I always ask my clients, my kids, my adults, my seniors, when was the last time you sprinted as fast as you could, that you jumped as high or as far as you could, or that you threw something as fast as you could? So I'll ask it to the audience out there and just give it some thought on when was the last time, if you took sprinting or jumping, when was the last time you moved intentionally as fast as you could or jumped as high as you could? Ideally, our answer is going to be fairly recently. In reality, our answer is probably, well, as fast as I could, being 100% of everything I've got in my body, it's probably been at some time. And we want to get back to where we can do that because it's use it or lose it. So other factors that can affect speed is mobility. And mobility is the range of motion, or mobility is the flexibility that we have the strength to control. So flexibility is my ability to move you through a range of motion. Mobility is your ability to move you through a range of motion in which you have full control and strength. So again, strength is that ability to produce force. The rate which we can produce force, or the rate at which we can produce torque or movement rotation at the joint, is acceleration. The acceleration is velocity. How fast am I moving divided by how long did it take me to get there? What's the time associated with it? Therefore, a greater force can equal a greater acceleration and greater velocity. But let's not negate mobility. Force production is a part of it. Mobility is a part of it. So in our youth, we're able to accelerate more rapid. Ours, the 60 time is better. We're driving a better sports car, a newer sports car when we're young than we are when we're older. And that's okay. Because how can we kind of set the table for ourselves so that we can still maximize our speed as we get older? Is how about we maintain and or improve and maintain our mobility? If I have a larger window in which to work, my acceleration rate does not need to be as great to still hit a high speed. If you picture somebody's swing, like you picture a Tony Finau swing and you picture John Daly's swing, you picture Tony Finau in 20 years and his velocity is likely going to be less, I'd say even in 10 years, 15 years, because he's working in such a small window. You look at a John Daly swing where his window is enormous and he's been able to keep up clubhead speed over the course, into his 50s now. And again, you have those natural abilities and pieces that can't be accounted for sometimes, but that's a great example of looking at, if I have a large window in which to move, I don't need to accelerate as rapidly to hit that velocity. Here's the catch. As we get older, we've sat longer, we've been in the car more often, we've commuted greater distances, we've been at the computer for longer periods of time, and as a result, we probably lost our mobility. But we can make gains no matter what. And this is where we start to target the senior golfer. We need speed, we need mobility in order to create that speed. So where does our mobility go? Well, when we sit, it's about the thing that we do most often, more than anything else. We sit in our commute, we sit at our job, we sit in our commute home, we sit when we get home, and then we get up and we go to bed. And we may exercise in there for regular an hour a day. And that would be fantastic. But you consider how much time is spent sitting versus how much time is spent doing something else. It's a significant disproportion. And prolonged sitting has significant postural consequences, can negatively impact mobility at numerous joints and regions. So we're looking at ankles, knees, pelvis, hips, spine, shoulders, neck, pretty much everywhere where we need to move efficiently for golf, we have mobility consequences related to sitting. There are two types of fibers in our body. So we talk about muscle fiber types. These are just general tissue fibers in our body. One is more elastic in nature. It's actually a coil, and it has an elastic spring type of a property to it. And the other is straight and more rigid. As we age, the proportion of fibers shifts from the elastic dominance towards a more rigid dominance in how our body heals itself and recovers overnight. So stiffness and the lack of flexibility is a real consequence of aging. But again, like the fiber types and things of that nature, there's still debate on, do we lose the elastic fibers because we're aging, or do we lose the elastic fibers because as we've aged, we've done less to maintain them? And we've worked on our range of motion less, we've worked in the gym less, we've worked on our mobility less. So that's another factor to look at. And again, I'm a big proponent of, until they can tell me otherwise, let's control our controllables. And this is an area I believe that we have some control in. So can lost mobility be found? The key to gaining mobility in tissues is time. Time spent under light loads of tension. And I say light loads of tension because if I'm stretching, if I'm doing mobility work and I'm working on my flexibility, I can do a heavy duty stretch for a short period of time and get zero gain in my range of motion. Part of that is when I do a heavy duty stretch, my muscles are likely to lightly fight against that stretch. There's likely to be an increase in tone or a guarded response to that. If I guard in the slightest, I gain in the least. So I want a very light stretch for a long time. The analogy I use is jeans out of the dryer. You pull your jeans out of the dryer, you put them on, they are snug. We have to suck in the gut to get the top button done. The zipper comes up and man, they are tight. if before I put them on, I pulled on them with all my might and I tried to stretch the legs out and stretch the waist out and really gave them a good yank and a good tug, and then I put them on, they would still be tight. I'd still be sucking into my gut to get the top button done, and I'd still have that zipper that's going up at a very slow rate. But when I put them on and I wear them like that, the amount of tension on them is relatively light. It's not a huge strenuous pull. And within an hour, they're a little looser. By the middle of the day, they're a lot looser. And by the end of the day, we may need suspenders to hold them up because that light load of tension affected the tissue and it allowed it to adapt to the stresses that we're putting it under. And that's what we're asking of stretching. So when you're stretching, when you're doing mobility work, back off on the intensity, increase your durations a little bit. Spend more time doing those types of things. So foam rolling the IT band out and having tears in your eyes and grit in your teeth because it's so intense, lighten that up a little bit. Spend a little more time working through that tissue and a little less intensity. And that's, again, time spent mobilizing the layers of tissue on one another, whether it's foam roller, tennis balls, massage work. If your massage therapist has you crawling off the table, you may not be getting the most benefit out of it because, again, you're probably guarding against that some. And then time spent after these two factors, actively moving through available ranges of motion to create mobility. If I spend time stretching, I better spend time after I stretch moving through that new range of motion. My body will not keep what it doesn't know is there. And the way to make it know it's there is to use it. So if I gain 5 degrees of rotation in my shoulder through stretching, I want to do something that puts me in that position actively, wakes up the muscle tissue, puts the capsule under stress, lets the brain know that, hey, you've got this range of motion now. The muscle now knows how to use it. And my likelihood of maintaining at least a part of that gain is much greater than if I just stretch and walk away and expect it to be there when I come back. So time and consistency are the keys to gaining. Consider how consistently we sit. Endurance in golf. So training the senior athlete, training the golf athlete. One of the big questions that comes up oftentimes is, what kind of cardio work should I do for my golf game? And I tell my juniors, you probably don't need to do a whole lot of cardio work for your golf game. What do you enjoy doing? Do you enjoy running? Do you enjoy biking? Do you enjoy swimming? Keep doing those types of things. But cardio isn't the focus on the young golfer, and here's why. Figure an average round of golf, I calculated it out and said, let's say 4.5 hours, 270 minutes. A young golfer, 6% of the young golfer's round, a whopping 16 minutes out of the 270, is considered high intensity cardiac work. Middle-aged golfer, 30% of a round. Now we're starting to see numbers, 30% makes me say probably want to do something about that. An elderly golfer, 70% of the time they're considered being working in a high intensity cardiac threshold while they're playing golf. That's 189, so let's round it up, 190 out of 270 minutes of golf, they're in a high intensity workload for their cardiac threshold. So that's where, again, knowing our history, do they have a history of heart attack? Do they have a history of pulmonary conditions? Do they have these types of things that could compromise their cardiac ability? Should this person be playing 18 holes? Maybe they should be playing 9 holes. Maybe they should be playing 6 holes. Maybe we want to look at these factors. The elderly golfer also spends nearly 100% of a round of golf at over 50% of their maximum heart rate. So they're 70% of the time in a high intensity cardiac workload, and 100% of their round is over 50% of their maximum heart rate. Cardiovascular fitness for the senior golfer, particularly for the older senior golfer, is absolutely key. So when it comes to specifically training the senior golf athlete, mobility, speed, cardiovascular fitness are the primary pieces that I look at. Will their joints and tissues allow for the requisite movements? That's the mobility part. How many years of fixed postures have they had? What did they do as a profession? If they're still working, what do they do for their professional work? And that kind of gives me an indication of what they do during the course of the day, what their behavioral components are. Again, we want to be able to control our controllables. We know changes are going to happen biologically, but we need to control our controllables. Key areas of movement, again, ankles, hips, pelvis, T-spine, C-spine, shoulders. Just like with golf, if we're looking to increase the person's rotation in their takeaway, increase their follow-through rotation of their T-spine, but they're in a C posture, we've got 3 dimensions of movement available at every joint in our body. it's like a glass of water, an empty glass. If I want to fill my glass of water, if I want to fill that glass with rotation, but I'm already living in flexion, well, my glass is part filled with flexion, so I only have a little bit left to fill it with rotation. We need to make those changes and be aware of that, or find workarounds and recognize that they're fixed in these positions. I can't expect to see certain movements without their compliance into gaining that mobility. So speed and strength training. My key with senior golfers, and my key with my athletes in general, something fast more days a week than not. So that means at least 4 days of their 7-day week, I need near maximal to maximal effort in doing something fast. Jumping, a medicine ball slam, medicine ball throw, sprints. And a lot of that is going to be determined on what is safe for them. What can they do? Maybe it's sit to stand as fast as you can 5 times, 10 times. So we're not even doing jumps, but we're just doing explosive, repeated work that can be done in a very safe way for somebody who maybe is more of a fall risk. Do it with 2 sticks, 2 walking sticks. Do it at the edge of a counter where they can have balance. We can modify that, but speed is something that doesn't just happen. We have to train it. And then without strength, there won't be speed. So focus on the large guys, focus on the glutes, focus on the thighs, the quads, and the hamstrings. The pecs, a lot of people are, they'll kind of have the comment of, well, you don't need to bench press for golf. And my thought is, well, why don't you bench press for golf? Why don't you do a chest press? Why don't you do a pulley press? Why don't we work the chest and think the chest isn't important for golf when the pectorals are one of the 3 largest spike EMG muscles? And an EMG, if you're not familiar with it, is an electric signal that is measured when you're asking muscle contraction. It measures that nerve muscle reaction that says, when I've got a high EMG signal, I have high muscle activity. Well, the pecs at the point of impact and follow through are one of the 3 largest spike muscles on EMG at any point in the golf swing. So if we don't work chest, we're gonna be missing something. Shoulders and grip are also some of the obvious. Shoulders for strength, shoulders for range of motion, grip for strength and that control. So without strength, there isn't speed, but without training speed, there won't be speed either. So training the senior golf athlete also requires our endurance and our cardio fitness. So again, find out what they like to do. I always tell people that, people ask, well, what about running? Is running good for my endurance for golf? And I ask them, do you enjoy it? Is it something they'll do? Somebody asked me years back what the best piece of home exercise equipment was that they could buy. They wanted to know, is it a Nordic track? Is it a treadmill? Is it X, Y, or Z? And I asked them, I said, what will you use? And I think that that's an important question, is what do you enjoy doing? If we're going to commit to doing something, or we're asking our clients to commit to doing something for their fitness and wellness, things we know that will benefit them on the golf course, what do they enjoy in this area that's going to help them? Excuse me. Strength training programs can also be geared towards cardio. So with my senior athletes, I take a lot of time in how I set my programs up to make sure that we're incorporating what that individual's needs are, but also what the general needs are. In the senior golf athlete's case, is I alternate between a lower body exercise, an upper body exercise, and so forth throughout the course of the program, so that we don't have to take a lot of rest moving from one exercise to the next. It's more like a circuit program. The shorter rest periods, under 30 seconds of rest period between exercises and training, keeps my cardiac intensity high, but it allows the muscles that we're looking to strengthen to have recovery time in their alteration of upper to lower. So a circuit training program is a great way to do that. Endurance and cardio needs to be addressed due to the time that senior golf athlete spends in that high intensity range when playing golf. So let's not negate that fact. And when you guys are working with them as well, is ask them, what do they do for their cardio? How often do they do their cardio work? And if their cardio work is just simply the fact that they get out and they play golf, that is not enough. It's kind of like the construction worker saying, well, I don't go to the gym and lift and train and get stronger because my work is very physical. Well, if I've got a senior golfer who's retired and what they do now for quote unquote work is play golf 4 or 5 days a week, that's their base need. I need them able to function at above their base need. So they need to do something to supplement that base need. That construction worker needs to go to the gym to be stronger than he needs to be. Because if we're just as strong as we need to be, we're challenging our recovery system. And the same thing for the golf athlete here. So a direct relationship to the body's ability to recover is our cardiovascular fitness. That's recover between shots, recover between holes, and recover between rounds and days. We want our cardiovascular fitness at the highest level it can be. Balance. One piece we didn't talk about, balance. And this is again related to our fall risk. It's related to athleticism. Balance involves components of mobility. It involves components of speed and strength. A lot of studies had come out a while back that said strength is the #1 determining factor in balance and falls in elderly. And more recently, it's come out and said speed is the determining factor as it comes to balance and fall recovery in seniors. And I'm a believer that yes, they're both right. You've got to be strong enough in order to recuperate balance, in order to maintain your postures, and in order to lose balance and not fall. Recovery of fall, recovery of balance is as important as not losing your balance, because not losing our balance is not realistic. We're going to lose it at some point in time, and we need to just be able to recover it. Now, you recover by being fast enough to make the reaction, and we recover by having the mobility enough to move through the range of motion necessary to make that recovery happen. And our mobility will also help us should we happen to go down. The more mobile we are, the more options our body has in terms of absorbing that blow. So mobility influences our posture, relates to how we control our center of mass. Our strength relates to how we reaction forces. Our speed relates to those ground reaction forces. And again, if we talk about how do we create more speed on the golf course, we've got to create more ground reaction force in order to create more speed. And the more ground reaction force we create, the less likely we are to have falls. So it all ties in. And then in training, vary the surfaces, vary the stance positions, put their feet right next to each other, have them brush their teeth in the morning. A lot of the things I try and do, mix it in through the day. When they're brushing their teeth, have them stand side by side with their feet, have them stand heel to toe with one foot behind the other. Vary the surface that they stand on, have them stand on a folded bath towel or a folded beach towel where they have something of a little bit of mush under their feet. These are all things that translate to the golf course. Not everything is a level range mat. When we get out on the course, as we all know, we've got different lies, we've got different feels, particularly in a year like this where we've had so much rain. You could have 1 foot on terra firma and you could have 1 foot in mud and muck. You can have 1 foot in the bunker, 1 foot out of the bunker. Getting in and out of the bunker is the #1 place a fall happens on a golf course. We want to be aware of those types of things. So these are all pieces that we can do. Even when you're working on the range, work on balance with them, play with their foot positions. Different things that they can do as a warm-up to kind of increase their awareness of their body before you start working with them on the range. We can do some things, and I'm glad to put some things together as a kind of a basic balance warm-up that would be a good tool to use for our senior athletes before we start to work with them. The more aware they are of their body and where they're at in space at that moment, the better teaching tool they're going to be for you. They're going to be able to learn a little bit easier. So training the senior versus the junior golf athlete overall is very similar. My training methods don't change a whole lot. My awareness of that person's capabilities needs to still be there. I need to be aware of what my junior can do. What do they do well? What do they struggle doing? Where are their range of motion limitations? Or in some of the junior athletes, where are their range of motion excesses? Again, flexibility excesses, not mobility excesses. If I can take their flexibility excesses in a junior athlete and train strength through that, where now they're more mobile and more able, that's a weapon. That's a great tool. In my senior golf athlete, the likelihood is they're not going to be too mobile. They're going to need mobility. They're going to need more strength, power, balance, and cardio, but they're very similar, just with a different little twist in my head of how am I approaching them. So with the senior golf athlete, more respect paid to intensity recovery relationship. Takes a little longer, as we all know. What used to be a day of soreness after exercise is now 2 days of soreness after exercise. My intensity recovery relationship needs to be paid attention to. When is the time since they last trained, if ever? So again, are they a regular gym person? Or are they a person that hasn't been to the gym in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, if ever? What are their medical conditions? And then a surpriser here, particular nod to hydration with the senior athlete. The why of this is as we age, our thirst sensation diminishes. So our awareness of our own hydration internally is less as we get older. So
Ken, how do you decipher what's just, especially with a senior athlete, how do you decipher what is just normal and appropriate soreness from the training and injury or inappropriate soreness due to the exercise?
You bet. Good question. Yeah, the muscle soreness should, and I, again, whether it's a senior golfer or even my junior golfers, I tell them muscle soreness should never impact your ability to move. You should still have full range of motion. You should not have pointed pain. So say I do upper body work and I now have pain when I raise my arm right here and I can point to it. And it's when I get into this position here, that's more injurious. That's more like a tendon type injury. I'm starting to think other ways. If I raise my arm and I say, yeah, you know what? It's just sore. It just feels kind of stiff, but the range of motion is still full and they can still do the normal movements in their day that they can do. That's a normal soreness. And we're looking at 24 to 48 hours. It should be no more than that 72nd hour. By that third day, things should be diminished and back to where you could repeat what you did before.
And if it's persisting longer than that, then do you have to tailor the training?
Definitely. That just tells me that I kind of overshot the what I thought was their capability. We dial back the intensity. It may be as simple as dialing in more rest time between the exercises. It may be adjusting their load, dropping the weight load down or the repetition count down. Maybe it's a change to 2 sets of exercise of each given exercise versus 3 sets of each given exercise and kind of ramping them up at a little slower level. Some of that too is in relationship to how did they recover. So what did they do when they left from me? Hopefully I gave them the insight on, you know, within that hour after training is your best hour to eat. So getting your protein doses, things like that in, which will help your recovery. Your hydration levels should be, again, on a basic day, most of us, almost all of us should be intaking half of our body weight in ounces of water. So I'm about 200 pounds. My goal is 100 ounces of water a day. And I'm a coffee fanatic. So drinking water for me through the day means I start with water before I start with coffee because I really want my coffee. But if I start with my coffee, I don't wind up drinking as much water as I should. And so that's an important factor, particularly as we get older and that feeling of thirst is lessened. So how they recover is a part of that. Yeah, on the injury versus the normal soreness front, normal soreness, I expect, and I'll let them know, I expect you to feel X, Y, and Z tomorrow morning. I expect you to feel your quads and your glutes tomorrow morning because we did these 3 things that are going to tax that. Now, it should not impact your ability to move. You should be able to play golf. You're going to feel it, but it should not be miserable. And again, most things, if you can point with a finger to where it's at versus show it with a hand and kind of rub an area, that pointed finger is of more concern to me than the area of stiffness or soreness. I hope does that answer? Okay. So yeah, so hydration is key. And I think that's a factor. A lot of people kind of, when you tell them how many ounces of water they should be drinking a day, it's a shocker. And I encourage people to buy a clear bottle, you know, a clear Nalgene bottle or whatever it might be. The hydro flasks are great, but they hide, you know, you can't see inside of it. You can feel it, you can kind of shake it, but you don't really know what you've drank through the course of the day. I've got my liter Nalgene that's clear. It sits on my table at the studio, and I can kind of look over through the day. And if I see that it's still full and it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm behind on my hydration levels. I need to work on catching that back up. There's that visual awareness. It's a powerful tool. But they talk about hydration, 25% in the morning, 50% through our day, and 25% towards the end of the day. You have a lot of our seniors, and especially kind of towards the super seniors, that'll say, well, I can't drink past 6 o'clock at night because I'm up 4 times in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. Well, then there's your clock, and at 6 o'clock at night you stop. So your 100% needs to be from 5 in the morning when you wake up until 6 p.m. in the evening when you wrap up your water intake. But make sure you're getting your hydration levels taken care of in there, and that's a very important factor when it comes to recovery.
So Ken, we got a couple of questions that have come in.
Yeah.
Derek Kang is asking about polio victims and seniors in general that
Yeah.
can't jump or jog due to leg problems. Do you
Yep.
focus more on upper body development, or you still try to proportion the training between upper and lower body?
That's a great question. That'll be very very individual based on what, like a post polio client, what sparing, if any, do they have? If they're on full leg braces that are locked at the knees in order to give them the stability and such, then yeah, then I'm going to focus on where do I still have those the active muscle capabilities. I'm going to focus more on the upper body. Even in my center, and I've got the luxury on having the PT background and you know, almost 30 years of doing that on top of the sports performance training, is I still look at them as an athlete. So I want to still develop whatever can be developed. It may be that I have them on the table, and instead of having them jumping and doing things, it might be resistance against me that I have them doing those types of activities. So if they do have some leg sparing and things like that, getting them into a position where they can still activate at their maximum level. And again, that's going to be something that's going to help them slow their ultimate losses as well. But yeah, it does become a little more upper body focused. And again, you train what you can. You play with what you've got, and it's you can still see some fantastic games.
And Barry Brandwin, what is the best exercise for big flexion walking seniors in C posture?
Well, I would say one is you have to start with some things that are going to open up that C posture. So we have to create the mobility factor, the flexibility factor first, doing some things. These are people oftentimes that if you lie them on the floor, they're uncomfortable, or on a firm table surface, they're uncomfortable without maybe two pillows underneath their head. So their first exercise and their first layer of exercising is oftentimes, how do we build that mobility back? And that's lying them on a firm surface, making them relatively comfortable with the support that they need for their head, and then dropping that by an inch, a half an inch, bringing that down with their palms facing the ceiling, almost like a picture like snow angels if you're lying on your back. If you have this person lying on the floor with their palms up and arms resting on the floor, head supported with the minimum amount of pillows needed to make them as comfortable as possible and not let their head be kind of tipped up at the ceiling, I start to have them do snow angels on the floor. How far can they raise their arms up out to their side and still keep their hands on the floor? And you'll find sometimes by the time they get 45 degrees away from their side, they're not even at a T position with their arms. Their hands can't stay on the floor because they're so tight in that rounded position. And I just have them work time in that position and then bring the arms back down. And then so kind of like snow angel stretches would be where I would start. From there, it's going to be a re-education now of the muscles of extension. So working on just chest up postures, could be active extension work. It could be doing some things with light rubber bands where they're doing some pulls and some rows to reinforce that posture. Things against the wall, if they stand with their back against their wall and their knees a little bit bent, and just do some arm raises as high as they can over the wall, again, emphasizing that extension. The C posture is a component of addressing the flexibility mobility issue, and that strength allowing them to then maintain that motion. So that would be where I would start. Ultimately, we'd get them prone. Ultimately, we'd get them doing different things that way. But that first layer is just get it to where they can lie on the floor with their palms up, and ultimately, can they get their palms up with their arms out at a T posture away from their side and doing snow angels in that way? Can they get their arms above that T posture into kind of a more of an overhead? If they can do that, that means that spine and shoulder girdle are starting to open up. And that's where I would start, is on that postural end.
So I've got a question also here from Mark Williams. Mark is 71 years old. He goes to the gym 3 days a week, Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. He does 1.5 miles on the treadmill, and he does some upper and lower body work after that. He also plays golf on Tuesdays and Sundays. Is there anything else that you recommend he be doing aside from inspiring me to get off my butt and get to the gym?
Sorry, hold on. Could you one more time?
The whole thing? Okay, so Mark Williams, he's a 71-year-old PGA member, goes to the gym 3 days a week, does 1.5 miles on the treadmill, does some upper and lower body work after that. He plays golf on Thursdays and Sundays in addition to the workout routine. What else do you suggest that he be doing?
Yeah, so with that, what I would say is that's almost an ideal client, because now we're working with the functional patterns associated with how can we optimize this person as an athlete for golf, right? We're already dealing with somebody who is taking care of their base level of fitness. We're already working with somebody who has that drive, the motivation, that dedication. This is the ultimate athlete for me to work with, in this sense of, this is where we start to take, and most people when they go to the gym we're working in one plane. We're doing up and down stuff. We're doing squats, we're doing presses, we're doing curls, we're doing pulls. So we're working in what we call the sagittal plane, but we're not working in the transverse plane, and we're not working in the side bending in the frontal plane. All three of these components essential. So this is where doing more functional sport specific training, I guess you could call it, is up this person's alley. And this is where doing a program like that with more sport specific movements 1 day a week is really enough to set a great movement foundation on top of the strength that they're already working to build. So that person that's already active and already dedicated, they may not need to change a whole lot, but I think adding that functional component of movement and rotation, that third dimension, because everything we do in the gym tends to be very unidimensional. We can make it a 2 and 3 dimension movement, and we can start to challenge them in those ways. We're going to see that that translate to, again, more athleticism. And that's always been my goal and my role, is one, to have athletes that are available, because an athlete's best ability is availability. And number two is, my goal is to build better athletes so that you guys can then build better golfers, because you'll see on Monday, you don't want to learn golf from me, but I think that we can all work as a partnership and play our strengths. And if I can provide that person as a better athlete to you, that's an easier teach for you guys.
Well, fantastic. We don't have any more questions from the field. Ken, on behalf of the Education Committee for the Southern California PGA, thank you so much for coming on and educating the section this morning. Again, your support of the educational programs that we have in this section is fantastic. We're very, very grateful for your time and for sharing your expertise. I look forward to seeing you on Monday. For all the PGA members on this morning's webcast, you will receive 1 PDR credit for being on the webcast this morning. And thank you very much for supporting the Catalyst. Have a great day, everybody. Take care. Thanks, Ken.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thanks, John.